There's a kind of apology that slips beneath language. You can hear it in the way someone softens their laughter, edits their opinions, or shrinks a little when they take up space. It's the apology for existing too loudly, too differently, too inconveniently. It's easy to spot the formal apologies. I'm sorry I was late. I'm sorry I forgot. But harder to notice the invisible ones. I'm sorry for taking your time. I'm sorry for needing more than you wanted to give. I'm sorry for being hard to categorize. Somewhere along the way, apology became survival. We learned that smoothing our edges made acceptance easier. We learned that pleasing others, even at the expense of ourselves, was safer than risking rejection. And so, without noticing, we began to carry a low-grade, chronic apology for simply being who we are. Yet, beneath that habit, something aches. Because every unnecessary apology is a small betrayal, a small affirmation of the lie, that you must shrink to be lovable, that you must soften your truth to be tolerated, that you must explain your very existence to earn your place here. Carl Jung, no stranger to the inner terrors we conceal, named the real battleground. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not to accept the polished, convenient, curated self, but the raw, contradictory, inconvenient whole. The self who sometimes disappoints others. The self who sometimes wants too much. The self who refuses to be flattened into a digestible shape. If you feel exhausted by endless explaining, if you sense a lingering apology at the core of your days, you are not weak. You are simply overdue for a deeper kind of freedom. The question is no longer, what are you sorry for? The real question is, what are you still apologizing for, and why? Before we learned algebra, or how to drive, or how to dress ourselves appropriately, most of us learned something else, far earlier and far deeper: how to apologize for who we are. It didn't always sound like, I'm sorry. Sometimes it sounded like, I promise to be good. Sometimes it looked like shrinking our needs to match what the adults around us could handle. Sometimes it looked like abandoning the strange, wild, inconvenient parts of ourselves so we wouldn't be laughed at, scolded, or left behind. Children are born expansive, loud when they're joyful, furious when frustrated, curious without self-consciousness. But culture and caretakers, often well-meaning, sometimes wounded themselves, teach us quickly. Some parts of you are lovable. Some parts are not. You're too sensitive. You're too stubborn. You're too different. You're too much. Or maybe you're not enough. Not smart enough. Not quiet enough. Not obedient enough. And so the trimming begins. We mold ourselves into palatable shapes to survive. We learn that belonging often demands performance, that acceptance sometimes means disowning the very traits that made us vivid, unique, real. Apology becomes less a behavior and more a posture, a background hum, a way of existing that whispers, am I okay? Am I allowed to take up this much space? Should I be different so you'll stay? Most of us carry these early lessons into adulthood without realizing it. We apologize for having needs, for making mistakes, for changing, for not changing fast enough. But none of it began because we were truly wrong. It began because we were young, malleable, and desperate to be loved in a world that made love feel conditional. The fear of rejection didn't grow in a vacuum. It grew because at some point, rejection cost us something real: connection, safety, dignity. Understanding where the apology reflex begins isn't about blame, it's about reclaiming. If we learn to apologize for our existence, we can also learn, slowly, bravely, to stop. Most of us say we want self-acceptance. Few of us realize what it demands. True self-acceptance is not the Instagram version, the tidy affirmation, or the polished journey of self-love. Carl Jung named the truth with unsettling precision. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because complete acceptance isn't about the curated parts. It isn't about celebrating our strengths, our moments of kindness, our glimpses of brilliance. It's about staring directly into the places we wish didn't exist. The selfishness, the cowardice, the envy, the wounds we hoped no one would ever find. To accept oneself completely is to hold the full contradiction of being human without flinching, without explaining it away, without labeling parts as bad or broken. It is to stop negotiating the terms of your existence, to say yes, even to what still feels unfinished or unflattering. And for the ego, this feels like annihilation. The ego thrives on partial acceptance. I am good because I am better than. I am worthy because I have achieved. I am lovable because I perform. Full acceptance removes the ifs and the because. It says, I exist. Therefore, I am. Partial acceptance, though more comfortable, keeps the apology alive. It creates a fragmented self, one part confident, another self-loathing, one part visible, another hidden behind a lifelong apology. It is exhausting to maintain, and ultimately it is a slow kind of self-betrayal. Radical acceptance is terrifying because it asks us to set down the story that made us feel safe. It asks us to stop apologizing for the parts that couldn't meet the impossible standards we internalized. It asks us to live not as a brand, not as a mask, but as a whole being. And if we can survive that terror, if we can stay present through the trembling, we emerge into something unshakable, a self that does not require permission to be real. Living apologetically might win us temporary approval, but over time it strips us of something far more vital, our wholeness. Every moment spent editing yourself to be more acceptable is a moment spent stepping further from your center. The cost isn't immediate. It accumulates slowly, almost invisibly, until you find yourself exhausted, resentful, and quietly estranged from your own life. Emotionally, the leakage is constant. You smile when you want to speak. You agree when you want to dissent. You nod while something inside you clenches. The body keeps score of these small betrayals. They manifest as tension, fatigue, burnout. Not because you're weak, but because you've been carrying the weight of perpetual self-correction. In relationships, the cracks widen. Bonds built on appeasement feel safe at first, but they are brittle. When you shapeshift to maintain connection, the real you remains unseen, and over time, a terrible loneliness grows. The loneliness of being loved for a version of yourself that isn't fully real. Creativity wilts too. Authentic expression requires risk, the risk of being misunderstood, rejected, judged. If apology is your default, you will censor the ideas that feel too raw, too different. You will water down your voice until it resembles everyone else's, and in doing so, you will starve the parts of you that were meant to bring something new into the world. The hidden cost of living apologetically isn't just personal, it's systemic. A culture of muted individuals breeds stagnation. The more we apologize for our depth, our strangeness, our vision, the more the collective impoverishes itself. Choosing to stop apologizing is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of restoration, a return to the unrepeatable shape you were always meant to inhabit. Not all guilt is created equal. Real guilt, the kind that follows an action misaligned with your values, can be clarifying, even corrective. It points to a boundary crossed, a repair needed. But much of what we carry is not real guilt. It is false guilt, inherited shame, learned apology. False guilt whispers that your existence is burdensome, that your needs are too large, your dreams too selfish, your voice too disruptive. It is the quiet background noise that keeps you saying, "I'm sorry," for taking up space, for asking questions, for wanting more. Society, consciously or not, profits from this inherited guilt. Systems run more smoothly when people doubt themselves. A worker who feels guilty for needing rest will overperform. A citizen who feels guilty for questioning authority will comply. A consumer who feels guilty for not being enough will keep buying solutions to non-existent problems. The machinery of false guilt is oiled by marketing slogans, cultural norms, and family scripts. Be good, be agreeable, be small. Be grateful for what you're given, even if it starves you. And so we internalize a dangerous equation. To be accepted, I must apologize. To be loved, I must diminish. But guilt is only useful when it's precise, when it points clearly to harm caused, not identity possessed. Real guilt says, I hurt someone. False guilt says, I am wrong for existing as I am. One liberates, the other enslaves. Learning to tell them apart is not just an emotional skill, it's an act of survival. It's how you stop being endlessly extractable. It's how you begin to inhabit your life unapologetically as your own. It's a common fear. If I stop apologizing, will I become cruel? Will I lose my softness, my decency, my care for others? The answer is no, at least not if your unapologetic self is rooted in integrity rather than ego. True self-acceptance does not harden you. It frees you to show up more fully, more honestly, and yes, more compassionately. When you no longer seek approval through apology, your kindness becomes cleaner. It's no longer a transaction, a veiled request for acceptance. It becomes a genuine offering, given freely, not extracted under duress. Living unapologetically doesn't mean bulldozing others with your opinions. It means you stop bulldozing yourself to make others comfortable. It doesn't mean you abandon empathy. It means you extend it without abandoning your own truth. There's a steadiness that comes when you stop performing goodness. You listen better because you're not anxiously crafting your next acceptable response. You hold boundaries without theatrics because you know your worth isn't up for debate. You forgive without losing yourself because you're not trying to erase your own needs to keep the peace. Unapologetic living, when grounded in self-acceptance, breeds a deeper kind of kindness, one that honors both self and other. It says, I respect your right to be you. I respect my right to be me. We can meet from wholeness, not from halves begging for permission. Because the goal is not to stop caring, it's to stop caring at the cost of your own soul. There's a moment, if you're brave enough, where you catch your own reflection. Not the polished version you present to the world, but the raw, unfiltered self. It can be jarring, it can feel like betrayal, and it can be the beginning of everything real. Carl Jung called this work shadow integration, the process of meeting the parts of yourself you were taught to hide. It is not glamorous. It rarely feels like self-love in the beginning. It feels like grief, like anger, like sitting across from the parts of yourself you once tried to exile. Mirror work doesn't require grand rituals. It begins in micro moments. Noticing when you apologize for a need before you've even voiced it. Catching yourself shrinking your opinion in a meeting. Feeling the urge to fix your face or your story so others will find you more acceptable. Instead of editing, you pause. You breathe. You stay. Ask quietly, what am I apologizing for right now? Then go deeper. Who told me this part of me needed to be erased? At first, the answers might sound like a parent's voice, a teacher's criticism, a culture's demand. Over time, you begin to hear your own voice underneath, the one that was buried, not broken. Shadow work is not about becoming invincible. It's about becoming whole, about reclaiming the parts you disowned not because they were wrong, but because they were inconvenient to someone else's comfort. Every time you resist the reflex to apologize for your existence, you reinforce a new pattern. I am allowed. I am here. I take up space. I do not need to earn the right to breathe, to want, to change. The mirror will not always flatter you, but it will free you. Imagine a life where you move through the world without the background hum of apology, where your choices are not reflexively trimmed to avoid disapproval, where your laughter is unedited, your opinions unshrunk, your presence unapologetically whole. Freedom beyond apology is not the freedom to offend. It is the freedom to exist without negotiating your right to do so. It is waking up and realizing you owe no explanation for your dreams, your scars, your pace of healing, or the shape your life is taking. When you stop apologizing for your existence, relationships change. Some will grow stronger, rooted in genuine resonance rather than mutual appeasement. Some will fall away, revealing they were sustained only by your willingness to diminish yourself. Both outcomes are grace. Work changes too. You stop striving to be palatable and start daring to be valuable. You choose purpose over performance. You build from alignment, not desperation. Even your internal dialogue shifts. You no longer police your feelings for being too much. You no longer dissect every interaction for proof of your worth. Silence stops feeling like a threat. It starts feeling like home. This is not a distant dream. It begins now in small moments. The email you don't over-apologize for. The no you offer without justification. The art you create without wondering who will approve. Freedom beyond apology is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. And reality, lived fully, is enough. You are enough. You were always enough. No more explaining, no more asking permission. Just breathing, standing, creating, becoming. Unapologetically alive. Imagine for just a moment that you owed no apology for any part of your being. Not for the dreams that feel too big. Not for the griefs you still carry. Not for the way your voice shakes when you speak your truth. Not for the days when you are not tidy, productive, or easy to understand. Imagine that you could exist without footnotes or disclaimers. That your joy didn't need to be justified. That your sadness didn't need to be hidden. That your failures weren't blemishes to polish away, but textures of a life fully lived. You were not born apologetic, you were taught it. And what was learned can be unlearned. You are not an inconvenience. You are not an error to be corrected. You are not a burden that must be softened, explained, or made smaller. You are a fact. A living, breathing, contradictory, extraordinary fact. And facts do not need apologies. They need acknowledgement. So today and tomorrow, and on the harder days especially, when the old reflex to shrink or explain rises up, pause, breathe. Remember, you are already allowed. You do not need to earn your place. You do not need to apologize for existing. Not anymore. Not ever again.